Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Variations on the Body by María Ospina. This is a collection of short stories translated by Heather Cleary, and Ospina demonstrates a number of great qualities as a writer in this debut collection of short stories. First, the nature of the stories themselves. Many of them are thrilling. There's a mystery to a number of the stories where Ospina is giving us enough information to be interested, to want some sense of resolution, to be curious. But she doesn't just tell us every detail. She doesn't spell everything out. And so the reader's imagination is left to wonder and question and fill in different gaps and blanks. And so that's one quality about these stories that's really quite interesting, is it's a story that you think about, that you take time to read, not just sprinting through. There's also this beautiful sense of perspective. Each story is narrated by a woman, and they reveal women at different perspectives, different phases of life. One story is the perspective of a woman who is attempting to essentially rejoin what is thought of as like the typical normal society there in Colombia. They're in the city working at a grocery store, a superstore as a cashier, but we're realizing that she has spent the past few years as part of the FARC guerrillas. And so her life has changed in a couple of different ways over the past decade, and how is she trying to fit back in? Another story is narrated by a woman who is the housekeeper for a wealthier family, and also that story includes the perspective of the daughter in that slightly wealthier family. And so we have the housekeeper's perspective and we have the daughter's perspective, each trying to grapple with a world that they're not fully part of, that they don't really feel part of. Just like in the first story with the woman who has gone from being a guerrilla to now a cashier. And there's also this quality about the stories where characters are trying to, in a sense, own their lives, own their identities, own their experiences, and still pushing up against boundaries in a way that feels very authentic, feels very natural. So those perspectives really work and build on each other. So despite this being a very short book of short stories, we still have numerous different experiences across Bogota primarily. But the other aspect to the stories is that there's this layering within the stories. Now, part of that is sometimes due to there being different narrators, and Ospina does a nice job of drawing out the different voices, of not necessarily saying, oh, the narrator has switched, but if you pay attention to the interiority of the writing, of the interiority of the dialogue, of what's said, and the vocabulary shifts, it's easier to tell, like, wait a second, this is from the mind of someone else. Or sometimes it's more explicit and it's a letter from a different character. So I would certainly recommend these stories. I wanted to read a passage from one of them to give a sense of like what her writing can sound like. And this is from Saving Young Ladies. The first time she saw them, Aurora felt an urgent need to save them. They were leaving the old mansion framed by her picture window in gray uniforms and white shirts. She had a burning desire to know if they faced their suffering with resignation or rebellion, and whether they really aspired to take their vows, or if that was just what the nuns who presided over their hermetic three-story residence were hoping. Aurora wanted to believe that the girls martyred their fingers by biting their nails to the quick, that they chewed the erasers on their pencils down to little nubs, that they impatiently plotted the moment when they could shed the sweaters that bound their bodies and make their escape. But neither the dozen girls, or would it be more appropriate to call them young ladies, walking down the street, nor the sign out front that intoned Saint Teresa Home for Women, satisfied the conviction of her faith. And so right there we start with this incongruous juxtaposition, this irony, that Aurora, who lives across the street from a convent, sees the young women walking in and out of it and wants to save them, even though they are living at and being educated at a place that is ostensibly going to save them, very explicitly. And so that sense of disconnect, of dissonance, is present in so many of the stories, where we see a character who seems to be one thing, but is living an interior life that is very different from that. Or we see a character who sees the world and perceives all of these elements of it that seem incongruous, that don't seem to quite actually be what they claim to be. This one is interesting in particular because Aurora, as she sees this, and she kind of thinks contemptuously of the young men she sees, or men she sees on a balcony, who like kind of seem to want to like look with binoculars at the women on the street or look through the windows, and she herself kind of thinks about it, and there's curtains there, and she thinks about why she chooses not to have curtains on her room, and that she has really nothing to hide. And yet in reality we start to see that she is recognizing desires that she has been trying to hide from herself and from the world. And later on, she gives one of the young women who lives across the street, Jessica, they bump into each other, have a few interactions, exchange a letter, and so she sends this gift. Aurora reread the letter on her computer screen and decided it would be better to copy it out by hand, so it seemed less formal. She thought about adding something in the first paragraph about coming to Bogota to finish a novel, but she worried it might make her seem strange in Jessica's eyes, suspicious even. So she didn't. In the end, she erased runaway and wrote leave. She took out hugs and put bye, which seemed younger, less intimate. She considered cutting the detail about the ex-boyfriend, which she invented. She was once obsessed with a girl in her class who played guitar in a rock band, but she decided to leave it. The letter seemed bland, but she felt as if her mental drought, that wasteland she found herself in after moving to a different country, wouldn't let her write anything better than descriptive phrases. She drew a few flowers around the edges of the paper. They turned out pretty badly, and folded the sheet into a small rectangle that she stuck to a box of rose-shaped chocolates filled with fruit liquor that she'd bought recently to give to Jessica if she got the chance. When she finally worked up the nerve to ring the bell to the old mansion that morning, she was slow to let go of the box as Hilma pulled it through the grating. She imagined Jessica hiding the chocolates in the section of the closet assigned to her, or under her bed. Maybe she would eat one every night, nestled under the blankets, or else she'd scurry to the third floor to wolf one down before the 6 o'clock rosary. She would snap the chocolate in two with her front teeth to get at the sticky sweetness of the elixir inside, slide her tongue into the hollow of the cracked rose. The effects of the liquor would fade quickly, but she'd feel happy and sleep peacefully. She would escape for a moment the frustration that radiated from her letters. Though she'd never really liked chocolates with fillings, Aurora had bought herself a box too. That way, whenever she ate one, she could imagine Jessica devouring a dripping rose and pace with her, as if by divine synchronicity. And I don't think I need to spell out what Ospina has this character Aurora actually desiring through the symbolism of biting the chocolate and tasting the elixir and the cracked rose. But it's interesting to see how Ospina has these characters grappling with the discoveries about themselves and the discoveries about their world. And there are works that feel a little bit more, unconventional. One is a woman who's cataloging how the fleas in her apartment have been biting her and where they're biting her and how she's trying to get rid of them. And so there's this sense of the comic about a number of the stories, but it's always revealed to have this undercurrent that seems at times quite dreadful, quite frightening. In particular, a story about an adult woman who has inherited a doll repair shop and is working on trying to figure out how to sell it because it's not going to be enough for her to make a living and her brother to make a living. And she instead gets these letters from someone claiming to be a priest in New York City asking for any parts she has that she can send there. And the way that one develops and builds and transpires is really quite fascinating and frightening in a number of ways. So Ospina is a writer I'll certainly be paying attention to, and I hope others will as well. I wanted to share a few authors I was thinking of, certainly Anna Kavan, with her stories, whether it's with ice or with her stories themselves. There's that quality of a reality that feels just different, but perhaps is poking at through this fabric and this veil that we live in to capture the reality that we're actually inhabiting. Certainly the same sensibility floods through in the great stories from Joy Williams, one of my favorites, sort of an undersung writer. The perspective of women in particular shines through in Alifa Rifat's stories, and I'll link my video, one of her stories in the description box. A very different side of comic writing from Colombia would be The Adventures and Misadventures of Macrol by Alvaro Mutis, but novellas like Ilona Comes with the Rain reveal that same comic element that's ultimately revealing to be a sad laughter at the state of the world. The dread of Shirley Jackson's stories certainly feels close. Additionally, the elements of less explicit surrealism in Murakami Haruki's stories, I think, is there. Someone like Emily Prager with A Visit from the Footbinder, and these are a little more outrageous and in your face, and have elements of the absurd about them, but there's a danger to many of these stories. And then finally, the great Silvia Ocampo with her stories as well would feel relevant. So let me know if you've read any of these writers, if there's other writers that they remind you of, or certainly if you also have read Variations on the Body and if you have thoughts to share. So I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.